Hi all, and thank you so much for coming to the Field Strategy Workshop. I hope you've had a great time attending the other workshops. Throughout this presentation, we'll be having a few audience polls, so please be ready to open another window or have a mobile device on hand. Additionally, feel free to ask any questions you might have in the chat or during or after the presentation, and we'll be going over all of the presentations at the end, or the questions for the presentation at the end. So, let's get started. Livy and Kate, would you like to introduce yourselves?
Yeah, sure. I'll go first. My name is Livy Taylor. I'm the captain of Team 1678, and I've been the driver for the robot since I was a freshman.
Hi, my name is Kate. I have been on the team since the 2018 season, and I'm currently a member of the software scouting sub-team, as well as the strategy sub-team lead.
Sorry, the clicker
Cool.
is not
So next slide.
advancing. Yeah, oh, here we go.
Awesome. In this presentation, we're going to go over our team's process to create our match strategy, as well as how to increase your robot performance in a competition. We're going to go over our process for making a pick list, and then after that, we're going to have a Q&A, as you probably know. Just a reminder, this is our team's insight to competition process, but this is not necessarily a set recipe for success. So we're gonna first start off with match strategy. At competition, we have 18 scouts. They will focus on three of them will be focusing on one robot at a time, and they will be inputting real live time data into our software, our tablets. This is the picture on the screen. This would be the screen for one scout who's scouting for 3061. And then as the match continues, they will click the buttons and input data. In addition to our 18 scouts, we also have 2 super scouts. They'll be focusing on one alliance at a time. So for instance, one super scout would be focusing on the red alliance, and the other one would be focusing on the blue alliance. They will then rank the teams on each alliance by qualitative data, such as speed, agility, or defense, if that's applicable. We have 2 stand strategists at regional competitions, and then sometimes more at champs. Our stand strategists sit in the stands next to our scouts, and they just take notes on anything that stands out about the robots at a competition. So this could mean certain mechanisms, climbing mechanisms, a good shooter, as well as auto paths, just really anything that sticks out that we want to remember later on in the competition after we have all of our data and we can kind of get drawn in it. So it's more of like just bullet point brief things about each robot to summarize it. We also have a match strategist who is a member, is a high school student on our team. They will be responsible for making sure we have a match strategy plan for each match, working with our alliance partners. They will get our match schedule and outline which matches we are in, and then start checking in with our alliance partners, like I said, making sure that their robots are ready to go, that they're queued up. And they will also coordinate with our drive coach once in a while. Our drive coach is a mentor on our team. It has been Mike Corsetto for years now. And as the name implies, he coaches our drivers, and he also makes sure that our robot is ready to go along with other members on our team. So the match strategist will making sure that our alliance partners are good, and the drive coach will make sure that our robot is good. As you probably guessed, we have a lot of data that we collect at competition. All the data from our super scouts and scouts get consolidated and processed in our server and then sent to our viewer app. That is the photo on the screen right now. It's primarily quantitative and qualitative data. Quantitative from the scouts, like I mentioned earlier, and the qualitative data from our super scouts. In addition to match data, we also have pit data. This is collected by our match strategist, who goes to each team's pit before competition and notes down things like drivetrain, dimensions, and weight. Really anything that has to do with whether a team can buddy climb with us, if that's applicable, or any other kind of cheesecake. Overall, our viewer is used by our match strategist and sometimes our drive coach and some people in the stands to look at downwards and upwards trends, as well as any notes we need when we're creating our match strategy, such as analyzing the alliances on the teams on our alliance, as well as analyzing our opposite alliance. Really important when you're creating your match strategy, first of all, make sure you're discussing with all the teams present. You guys are pretty much a team for one match, and it's really important that everybody's on the same base and up to date. You need to then debrief your capabilities as well as your opponent's capabilities. After that, you should go through your auto routines, make sure that no teams are going to get in the way of each other, and try and balance an advantageous auto with a consistent auto. It's better to have one that always works but maybe has fewer points that you gain than one that's really high risk and high reward. After your auto routines, go through your teleoperated roles. This is when you're really going to think about your opposite alliance and your alliance and their capabilities that you debriefed earlier. You're going to want to balance the stronger scorers and think about whether you want to do defense, counter defense, fairing if that's good in this game, and any other roles. When you're creating your strategy, try and think outside the box. You should be doing things that are allowed by the rules but maybe aren't super obvious or explicitly talked about. This could mean trapping a robot and preventing them from climbing an endgame if that year allows it. And also chokehold strategies. Obviously, in 2015 there was a chokehold strategy if you manage to bring the majority of the recycling containers onto your side and then continue to stack 5 or 6 stacks with the recycling containers on top for the rest of the match, and you didn't screw anything up, you're pretty much guaranteed to win that match. Really important for creating your match strategy is to watch other competitions throughout competition season. On our team, our strategy sub-team watches a lot of competitions. We require students, we assign students to watch certain matches as well as to follow certain teams. And we're basically looking for new and improved auto routines and paths, scoring and descoring paths and routines, and any human player strategies. Just anything that's new that we hadn't thought about but could really help us in competition. If you saw Mike Corsetto's and I believe other people's fall workshop on strategic design, you probably know how important it is to make goals for your robot and your team. It's better to come up with something like 2 specific tasks that you do really, really well over doing everything but at a lower performance. So this is in the context of match strategy, means should you go for 4 RPs in each match? Is it better to focus on winning or focusing on those bonus RPs? When is it better to do something over something else? So it changes in competition, obviously. In quals, you're going for ranking points, while in elims, you're focusing on just winning the match by sheer number of points for the most part, unless the game is very different. So for an elims, you're probably not going for those RPs, but in some games, maybe instead of RPs and elims, you get a lot of points, such as in 2017 if you spin all the rotors. As soon as you get the match schedule, you should be looking through it and analyzing it. You should be outlining, again, which matches you're in and identifying really tough matches, and then trying to reach out to your alliance partners as soon as you can.
All right, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about what you can do for the robot side of things to improve your performance that way. So there's like a lot of strategic stuff you can do, but a lot of it comes down to how your robot works. So I know this topic has been covered in a couple of other fall workshops, but I really want to emphasize that your robot's design is really an integral part of your match strategy. So if you design your robot in a certain way, that means you're committing to playing out a match in a certain way. So for example, if you ask yourself the question, what does our ideal match look like? For 1678, our ideal match would look like us scoring as many points as possible and getting the bonus RPs. So we need to design a robot that accomplishes that goal. For other teams, maybe your ideal match looks like a really solid performance that attracts the attention of like a top 5 seed and gets you picked in the first or second round of picks. That then changes what your robot is going to look like. So you need to kind of consider your team's capabilities, your time, your materials, and design a robot to accomplish the goals that you set for yourself. There's a lot of teams that if you kind of try to do everything, sometimes you'll fall short in a lot of the regions that you're trying to be strong in. But there's been so many strong teams that have been picked as defensive robots or as backup scorers because they designed their robot. They know, like, we want a fast robot that can win a push battle and plays really good defense. And if you design around those three goals, you'll find a lot more success because you committed to a kind of smaller focus. So going back to kind of our example for 1678, I'm going to cover this a little bit more in depth, but I have a couple of examples for different years. So in 2018, the field is kind of divided in half, and so there's not a whole lot of room to maneuver. And so we identified that our goal is to place as many cubes as possible on the scale, which is the higher scoring area. And so the way we wanted to do that was because the scale and the line of cubes are so nearby, we didn't want to waste time turning our robot around. And so we decided that one of our robot's features needed to be an ability to flip over and score backwards while we can intake from the front to save time. Similarly, for 2019, we realized that our goal was to fill up an entire rocket with hatch panels and then cargo so that we could get the ranking point and most likely win. And so that kind of pushed our decision to design our robot in this way that has pass-through so that we can score as many points as possible. And then once again, for 2020, we decided our ideal cycle would look like us picking up 5 power cells, driving under the tunnel, throwing them into the high goal, and then repeating that pretty much as possible to get a ton of points. So all of these goals, we identify them in the first 3 days of build season. And those goals that we've decided on influence our robot's whole design and build process, our driving practice for the whole rest of the season. So it's really important to keep a focus on your end goal and remember what your team wants to do. Instead of waiting until you get to your competition, you're like, okay, well, our robot can drive and we can pick up a hatch panel, so I guess we're going to do that. It's important to remember what your goals are the whole time and work around those. All right, so once you've arrived at your competition, there's a couple of things you always have to keep in mind. First of all, no matter how much you prepare, things are always going to go wrong. However, there are things that you can do to make sure that you encounter problems or have failures less often. So one thing that I think is really great about our team is we have a really well-defined pit process. So basically, we'll end up doing the same thing between every single match. We'll come back from the match, fix anything that was broken, do a systems check, go to the practice field, come back, do a systems check, and then go to our match. And so the systems check, if anyone doesn't know, is basically where we run through every single feature on the robot, like our vision, our scoring, our drivetrain, the intake, that type of thing, to make sure it all works. And so it gets a little repetitive, but it's definitely important to make sure your robot is working at all times because, it's the worst thing in the world to run your intake 5 minutes before the match starts and you realize it all fell apart or your mechanism wheels are breaking, stuff like that. So try to keep it consistent. Our team has a checklist, our pit checklist that we have attached to our robot cart that kind of has steps and an emergency bin that has all of the kind of key components that we might need. It's got gaff tape, flush cutters, zip ties, that kind of thing. Anything you might need for a quick fix if you're in the queue line and something goes wrong. Next up, our drive team roles are really clearly defined. So we don't have to spend a lot of time figuring out who's going to do what. So for example, when we get to a match, we all know exactly what our jobs are. So for example, as the driver, my job is to take the driver station and put it on the Alliance station, plug in the Ethernet, turn on the computer, get it connected to the field, all of that. Meanwhile, our operator and our drive coach will carry the robot onto the field and get it aligned and set up, while our technician takes the cart and goes off into the waiting area to wait for the end of the match. So by having everyone in these defined roles, knowing what their job is, not only does it make your kind of pre-match setup work better so that you have time to go over your strategy one last time, you can chat with a referee, make sure your robot's working. It also, I think, helps with nerves a lot because everyone knows what their defined role is. They're not confused, nothing is unclear. And so I think it at least helps me feel a bit more secure with what's going on at the time. And then last of all, best thing about competition is the practice field. I very, very highly recommend it for any team ever, no matter what. 1678 on practice day makes it our goal. Pretty much we walk into the building and we're like, okay guys, what's the plan? We're gonna work on our robot, get it unpacked and fixed up as fast as possible, and be the first ones onto the practice field. Or if there are practice matches, we're gonna be the first one in line for practice matches. Because the practice field and the practice matches are, like, honestly, they're invaluable. Having a big open space to move your robot around and have it kind of in as close to the real setting as possible is really, really important to making sure it's all working. And practice matches especially, you can test out, running into people. If you like playing defense, you can test out with the real field elements instead of, like the wooden ones in your shop. So really try to get to the practice field. Don't spend too much time, fiddling around with the robot in the pit. If it works, go practice with it. Absolutely every single time. All right. So moving into kind of more during the match type of thing, when it comes to kind of scoring and how to maximize your point output, it's pretty important to determine the roles for your alliance members. So typically it's going to look like multiple scorers and possibly a defense robot, but it's important that everyone knows their roles because during the match, it gets pretty chaotic, it's pretty fast paced, and so it's important that everyone knows what they're doing. When it comes to deciding on 3 scorers versus 2 scorers and 1 defender, honestly, most of the time, I think it's better to go for 2 scorers and 1 defender, just because defense is really, really strong in almost any game that kind of allows it or it's even possible in, because there's not really a way to outplay defense, no matter how good you are at driving or how bad the defender is. If there is a defender on your robot, you're going to be moving slower through the field and you're not going to be scoring as many points. It's kind of a given. So if you get a defender on the strongest scorer on your team, they're just going to have to work through the defense. There's not really much you can do. Like sometimes we consider at 35 seconds, us and our other alliance member are going to switch which rocket we're scoring on. But honestly, that type of stuff is really difficult to pull off during a match because a lot can change because it's moving so quickly. So that's why it's really important to be prepared for defense and practice driving against it. And so I'm going to cover that also a little bit later when we get to some game examples. And then also when you're in the match, there's, like Kate mentioned, some out-of-the-box thinking that can go into it. So there's a couple of other strategies you can use. Instead of having a defender, you could experiment with funneling. I think this was pretty strong in games like in 2017 or even 2018, where the kind of infinite source of game pieces was on the opposite side of the field, while the scoring area was closer to you. So having a robot whose only job is to move those for you while you're focusing on the scoring is really strong. And then also there's, I like to call it cheesing. It's kind of like you're not really supposed to do it type of thing, blocking climbs, or if you have a robot that's kind of, someone posted it on Chief Delphi a little while ago, a robot that tilts itself over on purpose and builds a wall in the middle of the field because it expands really big. Usually that stuff is starting to get outlawed more, but if you have a really unique robot on your team, it's definitely worth considering using that capability. All right, and then really fast before we move on, I'm going to go into a little bit more detail of how our drive team works, so you can understand what's going on during a match with those. So on our team, the 2 people who control the robot, we call them the driver and the operator. So I'm the driver, and basically what I'm doing is moving the robot as a whole around on the field. So I pretty much only have control of the drivetrain. Depending on the year, sometimes the driver will have a couple of scoring capabilities. Like for 2019, for example, if it's much easier for me to tell if the hatch is going to stay on the rocket, so I might have a button to deploy the hatch. But usually that type of stuff is left to the operator. So the operator can't move the robot, they only control the functions on the robot. Running the intake, popping out the intake, turning on the climber, that type of thing. So yeah, I just wanted to clarify that because I know a lot of teams have different names for those jobs. And then on the rest of the drive team, we have the technician who, of course, is in charge of keeping the cart in the new designated cart area. And then also usually they're just another member of our pit crew who's on a sub team that's not already kind of represented in the drive team so that we have as much technical knowledge as possible shared among the people on the field. Next up, we have our drive coach. So our drive coach is Mike Corsetto, of course. I think this role is incredibly important and often easily looked over, especially during matches and in eliminations. So the drive coach will be kind of communicating our strategy both to me and the operator and to the rest of our alliance. So I kind of like to think of him as a shot caller because especially in elimination matches, the drive coach is the one usually who needs to be looking at the clock because the driver and operator are focusing on the robot. And so they need to make the call like, okay, this needs to be your last game piece. You need to go start climbing now. Our defender needs to come back to the other side of the field. And so having that one, it could be your drive coach or someone else's who's ready to step up and communicate what's going on to everyone at the same time. Because the driver and the operator, it's unavoidable. Honestly, they're gonna tunnel vision probably on scoring the pieces. Sometimes the end game noises, like the whistle or like the get to the chopper noise, that type of stuff can alert you. But it's really important to make sure you have a backup so that you're not like placing your hatch panel and wait, there's 5 seconds left in the match, you can't climb anymore. That's not what you want. And then the human player, of course, they're just giving the game pieces. Usually they're on the opposite side of the field, so they don't get to interact with the rest of the team as much. So it is important that they're totally on board with both the strategy that you're planning and also like if something changes, what they're supposed to do in that situation. And then also any signals that the robot might have. Like for example, in 2017, our robot had LED lights that signaled what type of game piece that the human player was supposed to give to the robot. So just making sure that you're in communication with them and they know the whole plan before we get into the match. And so last of all, the way our drive team is chosen is just Mike Corsetto, our drive coach, will pretty much, if there's an opening on the drive team, he will pretty much just ask someone to take that spot. Usually a student who he thinks is really, really dedicated because for driving and operating, it takes a lot of time to get enough practice and be familiar with the robot. So it's usually up to him to find the best student for that position. So we don't have tryouts or elections or anything for those roles. It's chosen by Mike. All right, so now I'm going to go over a little bit kind of the nitty gritty about, from my perspective, moving the robot around on the field. So I'm going to give a couple examples with different years and stuff. All right, so when you're thinking about moving your robot around and kind of what a robot will do in the game, you got to first identify what kind of driving are you going to be doing in this game. Because depending on the layout of the field and the objectives on the field, the kind of most important qualities of a robot are going to change. So you could have speed. The game could be about speed. It could be about accuracy and placement of the game objectives, or it could be about defense and counterplay. So what I kind of mean by that is one example of speed, I think, would be 2017, where the gear cycles were kind of the core of the game. And that's pretty much a full field 52-foot cycle. So the fastest robots were going to have the most success with that. A game more about accuracy and placement. I think I wasn't around for it, but definitely 2011 Locomotion, where you're putting the little balloons on tiny hooks, or 2019, where you have to put these hatch panels on the really small pieces of Velcro. In games like that, it's really important to have a well-tuned drivetrain to have a lot of practice and control over your robot. And then defense and counterplay, this is about getting in the way of other robots if you have really good opportunities to kind of inhibit scoring. That can also change your goal during a match. So once you kind of identify that, then that's how you kind of design your cycles and the path that your robot is going to take when it's going to score the objectives. So up here, I have a map of the 2018 game, and I have in green on the left basically the only two cycles that you would do in this game if you were scoring on the scale. So the reason that, if you guys aren't familiar with this game, actually, I'm going to explain it really fast. So we have these 6 gray cubes they're not cubes, they're rectangles on the field in the middle a bit here. And you want to place these yellow cubes on top of them, and they're designated to your side by some LED lights on them. And then, so there's this pyramid here, and then there's a line of them. And then also on the opposite side of the field from you, your human player can deliver cubes to you. So those are the only 3 sources of cubes on the field. Our team decided that it wasn't really feasible to get cubes out of the human player station unless absolutely necessary, because you're kind of going through enemy territory. It's a lot farther away, so it's slower because you have less visibility. A bunch of reasons like that. And so our only 2 cycles are going to be these lines of 6 cubes and this pyramid of 6 cubes. Well, it's more than 6. There's a lot of them in there. Some of them are taken away by other robots for other purposes, though. But in any case, the 2 cycles are from the scale to the line and back to the scale, and then from the scale to the pyramid back to the scale. So obviously the ones behind the switch in a line are a much shorter cycle. And so the reason we do this one first, but because it's such a short cycle, you can't maneuver your robot around very much. And so that, like I mentioned earlier, is one of the reasons that we designed our robot to score backwards, so that we didn't have to turn around, kind of waste time positioning ourselves. We could just do kind of like a C shape over and over again, and then just extend the bottom of it repeatedly to score all 6 cubes as quickly as possible. And then once we ran out of cubes like that, we would get the rest of them from this pyramid here. And so you can see I have 2 lines drawn from the pyramid to the scale, and that's because I want to quickly touch on something that I struggled with a lot as a driver, and something that really, when I watch other people drive, I notice a lot. So when you're doing a cycle, the fastest cycle comes when you're stopping as little as possible and slowing down as little as possible. So the fastest cycle ever is no defense, max speed, stopping only to pick up a cube, and stopping only to score the cube. Honestly, ideally not even stopping to score the cube, but that's not really possible. And so, something I see a lot of people do in their cycles, and what I used to do, is I kind of had this obsession with driving the robot forwards with what I viewed it as forwards. So I would pick up this pyramid, this cube from the pyramid, I'd drive back, I'd do a little shimmy so the robot was facing the scale, and then I'd drive back forward towards the scale, and then stop again so I could score the cube. And obviously this is a lot slower than just grabbing the cube, doing a little like swoosh, driving backwards all the way to the scale, and then tossing it over the shoulder with our flip over scoring mechanism. So I think it's definitely useful if you're a driver or if you're a strategist who's helping the driver to review your matches and notice if there's places where you often are slowing down for a reason you don't need to. Like if you're struggling to intake a game piece from a human player, maybe that's something you need to practice more. If you're stopping in the middle of your cycles for a reason that's not very clear, that's definitely another place you can improve on. But really consider, like, what does it take to get the fastest cycle possible, and what can I do to make sure I do that every single game? All right, so this is kind of for the audience a little bit, but here I have photos of a bunch of different layouts. So kind of as I'm talking, if you're familiar with any of these games, try to think in your mind, like, if I want to be a high scoring robot, what is the best cycle for me? And what is the best alliance station for me? Because that will be a poll in a hot minute. But so since you're given the layout of the field from the very first day of kickoff, you kind of need to be able to identify this stuff right away. Because if you know, like, our robot, like on 2017, is going to be driving across the whole field multiple times during a match, it really needs to be fast. And then when you're discussing your robot design, you can say, hey guys, our robot needs to be really, really fast. And then you'll design it that way, and you'll see a lot of success in competition because you took the time to identify kind of the requirements for a strong robot in that year. So I'm just going to give you guys so I'll just give you a minute to kind of take in the fields and try to see it from a cycle speed point of view. What's the fastest way to get every cycle done? So for 2019, obviously hatch panel straight to the rocket. You don't want to be crossing over the field ever. You don't want to be fumbling your hatch panels at the intake spot or at the scoring spot. You probably want to be picking up cargo from the depot as well. You don't want to be getting free field cargo unless you're lucky enough to have cargo right outside the rocket, which it sometimes ends up falling into. So just having a good perspective on where the game pieces are going to come from, and then designing your cycles and your robot's ability to complete those cycles around that is going to give you kind of a big increase in the points you're able to score. And then last of all, actually, yeah, we can just go with this. So we're going to do a poll really fast. This one is about alliance stations. So you can only actually choose your alliance station in some cases in elimination matches. But I'd like you guys to type in this link we have on screen here and tell us in the poll, if you were 1678, which alliance station is best for your cycles if you want to be scoring the power cells in the high goal as much as possible.
The link is also in the live stream chat.
Okay, and the link is in the live stream chat as well. Or you can scan this QR code. Got a lot of votes for right so far. We got 1 vote for middle, 1 for left. There's definitely a clear favorite. Gonna wait just a little bit more. Awesome. Okay, we're at 9 votes so far. That's pretty good. Okay, so definitely it looks like most people are saying the third station, the one to the farthest right. And then a couple of people are saying left and middle. So if we can go back to the photo, I can explain a little bit. So I think I definitely agree with what you guys voted for, because if coming from the Blue Alliance, which is where the green circles are right now, our cycle is going to be from the loading station, the little triangle right next to the wall, under the tunnel, maybe picking up a couple more balls on the way, and then sitting in that zone and scoring straight into the high goal. And so if you guys are at all familiar with the 2020 field, this giant square in the center of the field, at each corner, it's a really big pillar because this is like a giant truss that you hang off of in the end game. But Alliance Station 3 gives you a great angle onto the pickup area. It gives you a great angle to make sure that you're not about to decapitate your robot going under the tunnel. And you pretty much have a straight shot into the goal. So if you're also a robot that doesn't have a vision system, you can do some adjustments to your angle of shooting if you need to a lot more easily as well. I think number 2 is second place for a scorer, because you can kind of see you can see the intake area and you can see most of the field. The only issue is this truss, kind of the northernmost truss, will block your view of the scoring area. And then number 1, sadly, would probably not be my favorite. But I think number 1 would definitely be the best for a defending robot, because you have a great view of both your side of the field and the opposite side of the field. So you can defend easily both the pickup areas and the scoring areas. So yeah, I hope that gave you guys a little bit of insight. You often don't have a lot of control over where your alliance station is, but it's definitely good to keep in mind for elimination matches where you can shift things around a little bit.
Okay, so as the competition continues, As the competition continues, you want to display qualities of a good pick. Even if you are not in the top 8, you still want, if you are in the top 8, you still want to show that you are a good pick. You might work with someone else in the top 8, and it's just really important to show that you can communicate well, collaborate, and just kind of show those soft skills off as well as hard skills, such as making sure your robot works as well as it can in a match. If you are unsure about what high ranks are looking for, you can go up and ask them. In 2019, second picks were typically defense bots who could specialize in cargo ship scoring. You're going to also want to inform these high ranks when you're going to display these qualities. Make sure to let them know when you're going to maybe show off defense in a match where you're actually going to be playing defense. And then make sure to ask sooner rather than later in a competition. Match strategists and other strategy positions on teams get really busy as the competition goes on. On our team, our match strategist is starting to worry about elims as well as finalizing our pick list. So it's really important to ask early so they have more chances to watch you in a match, and so they are less stressed and they can actually focus on your robot. Our team starts creating our pick list on the first day of competition. After the first day, we don't all meet, our mentors meet, as well as strategy positions like the super scouts, match strategist, and stand strategists. We all gather in one room and we project our pick list onto a wall or a projector screen if that's available. Then we go from the top of our spreadsheet, working our way down. So for example, we would start with 1 and then we would go to 2. We would decide if 2 should be moved above the first rank, and if it should, then we would move it above until we no longer think it should be raised. And if it shouldn't be raised, then we just leave it there and we move to 3. This is also called bubble sorting if you're familiar with that. If we ever have any disagreements or discrepancies between our choices, we'll just take note of it and then work on it the second day. It's really important for your pick list meetings to keep going and not to get stuck on things. You're going to get burnt out and tired and you still have a whole nother day of competition ahead of you, and that's just at regionals, chances even more. So just take note of it and then move on. For our second day of competition, like I mentioned, we go through any disagreements and we just finalize our pick list. So the stance strategists and mentors that are involved in the strategy process will be pretty much completely just focused on finalizing and revising our pick list. The match strategist and our drive coach will also be trying to work on it, but obviously they're still trying to make sure that we finish the rest of our matches and that everything is working with those. If you want to pick a team, obviously it's a good idea to try and secure a high ranking. After that, it's just important to become prepared. Even if you're not in the top 8, it's still a good idea to prepare potential partners and in a pick list if your team's able to do that. The first picks will typically be high-scoring robots who are pretty versatile, so they can pick up slack if needed. They're your strongest opponent, so when you team up with them, they'll become your strongest ally as well. And they're often just a high-scoring robot with similar capabilities to the Alliance Captain. Second picks will often be performing simpler scoring tasks or defense depending on the game, and it's really important for your second pick that they have good reliability. You need to make sure that with your second pick, there's fewer robots to choose from, but it's better to have a robot who is able to score or defend the entire time, but do that slightly poorer than a robot that could be incapacitated the whole time. So with those ideas in mind, we're going to start another poll. Here's a screenshot of our pick list editor. We're just going to call the teams 1, 11, and 16 as their order ranks are. So if we were going to look at this data, pick ability, driver ability, climbs, and the rest of them, which ones would you guys consider would be good for first pick? So again, first picks are high-scoring robots who are pretty versatile. They're your strongest opponent, so they're just a high-performing robot overall, but especially with your scoring. So I will give you some time to decide. So you should just be able to go to that link and input your decision. Cool. So yeah, so far it seems like you guys are all picking the first one, which is the correct choice in my opinion. They had pretty high scoring capabilities. If we could go back to that slide, they had a high teleoperated scoring for the high goal as well as in the autonomous period. They were able to climb, so it wasn't needed that we buddy climb with them, and they had a really high driver ability and just our overall pickability score. And then for our next slide is another one, another poll. This is for a second pick with the same data. So looking at this, second picks again are defense bots for the most part. They don't need as high scoring. Driving ability is really important as well as just reliability. And for something to note for this spreadsheet, look at the colors more than the actual numbers. Some of the data points are based on above the average or below the average, and so sometimes the numbers might not seem right, so just focus on the colors if you're ever confused. Yeah, so 16th, the 11th one was not as good at driving, so it would not be good for defense, and you'd be worried that they could get in the way of your alliance. And that's all the slides we have, so we can take questions now.
Yep, so that marks the end of our presentation. If you have any questions, concerns, or comments, feel free to contact us at strategy@citruscircuits.org. And yeah, let's move on to the Q&A. Do we have any chat questions? Again, please put any questions you have in the chat. Awesome. So Ludi asks, how much does robot design affect strategy, and how much does strategy affect robot design? Liv, you want to take this one?
Yeah, sure, I can take this one. So I think this is kind of related to our team's kickoff and robot design process. I would say in the first 3 days of the season, strategy affects robot design because we're kind of strategizing how the game works and what the best way is to score points, and using that information to decide what our robot needs to be able to do. But then kind of once you're at the competition, it's kind of more about adapting. For example, if your robot's climber is broken during a match, then you know you can't climb, and that might affect your strategy in the game. You can keep scoring until the end, and then that might change your focus to having one of your other robots climb at the end of the match. So maybe you want to check with them ahead of time, double check that their climber is working, that kind of thing. But I think your robot design should definitely be created with regards to what your strategy during the match ideally would be. So you don't want to we want to make a triple climb because we feel like it. We want to make 1678 wants to make a triple climb because we think that will give us the best chances of winning a match and then winning a regional and then winning the world championship, which of course is our final goal at the end of the day.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Livy. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I can also add a little bit to that. So at the beginning of our season, if you know anything about how our kickoff process is, on kickoff, we will all read the game manual, and then after that, we have a discussion about what we want to do. And this is where the entire team, not just like certain strategy members or certain mechanical members, will all be deciding what we want to be able to do. So this could be, we want to be able to go under the trench, or we want to be able to score in the high goal. And after this, then the mechanical sub-team breaks off, and they will be discussing how we can actually achieve these requirements, while strategy sub-team will be talking that day about how we want to go about scoring stuff during the game. Like, we're just starting to talk about what's a first pick going to look like, what's a second pick going to look like, and applying that also to how is our robot doing, how are we designing it, and how is that going to fit in there.
Awesome, thank you. So our next question is, how do I get picked by 1678? So by I, I'm assuming they mean a robot.
I can take this
Um,
one as well. Oh, or do you want to, Kate?
You guys
Go
can
for
both
it,
go, it's
Livy.
fine.
Yeah, I'll go first. So to get picked by 1678, first ask us what we're looking for, because we'll definitely tell you. Um, since 2020 kind of got canceled, like we all know, I'll give an example for 2019. If you come up to us in our pit, between one of our matches, and you say, like, hey, we're looking to be like your second pick, or maybe even your first pick or your third pick. What do you think we should focus on? We'll probably tell you for that game, we're looking for a strong defender who's really consistent in matches, and has a good drivetrain for a triple climb and for winning pushing battles. And so then maybe what that would signal to you is, in my next couple of matches, even if I think I could put up some great points, I should probably spend at least some time playing defense on other robots to show off how good I am at defense and how we would be a great defensive pick for you. Because there's no way for our team to know if you're the best defender in the world if you never play defense in your qualification matches, because the data from qualification matches is the only information we have about you. Because we can't necessarily go off your promises of being a good defender. We want to see how strong you are in your matches so that we know what our alliance would stand to gain if we were able to pick you in the draft.
Kate, you want to go?
I don't have much more to add than that. Just again, make sure you display soft skills and hard skills with being reliable, making sure that you're queued up and ready to go, that your robot is in working order, and that you're able to communicate and collaborate with us. Yeah, I think that's mostly it, and making sure that you do your best in each of your matches, obviously.
Awesome. So our next question is, which parts of strategy stay mostly the same between games, and which parts change the most?
I can take this one first. So, as you probably have guessed, first pick and second pick roles don't change too much. Usually, first pick is just a high-performing robot who's good at scoring, while second pick will be simple scoring tasks or defense. However, our team creates a playbook where we try and figure out what robots are doing in each match. So usually we define what are the different combinations of robots on an alliance. So if we have a high-performing robot and two lower-performing robots, what are their roles going to be and what are our roles going to be, so that we can best utilize our ability in that match. We'll also think, if we have two middle-performing robots and one high-performing robot going against an alliance, maybe of a different combination, what are we going to do? What are our cycles going to be like? So all of those change a lot, obviously, between a year, because we have a totally different game. We have a totally different field, all that. But there are parts that stay the same, such as types of defense, pinning, blocking. Those mostly stay the same, just their locations and maybe things that we especially look at. And their importance can change, but for the most part, everything doesn't change too much. And Livy, if you have anything to add more on the driver's side.
I think it sounded great to me. I think the only thing that changes is, like, what does an ideal cycle look like? Because obviously all the game elements and the field structure and the layout is going to change a lot.
Great answer. So our next question in the chat is, I've heard 1678 actually regrets deciding to design a pass-through mech in 2019. What do you think you missed when making this decision, and what would your ideal 2019 robot look like in retrospect?
I can answer this. I'm not on the design team, so I definitely didn't suffer as much when it comes to our pass-through broke again. We just, burned out another motor. But I can say, as the driver, I honestly think the pass-through is awesome. I think, like, my favorite and most satisfying moments of like the whole 2019 season was filling up every single hatch panel in 40 seconds because it literally took us like 2 seconds for each hatch panel on the close side. I think what really went wrong with the pass through was, first of all, we thought there would be a lot more ground intaking of hatch panels coming at happening during a match. And so our initial designs for a pass through were based around not only do we need a pass through, but we also need a pass through that enables us to pick up from the ground. And so without going into too much detail, it was a massive disaster, honestly. It was like we had this awful like plastic spatula that would tilt up the hatch panel a little bit, and then the pass through would have to flip over and like pick up the hatch panel from the spatula. It was really bad. And then also I think sometimes we forgot that hard stops exist. So we burned out a lot of motors. So I think going back, if we had known that hatch panels are not going to end up on the ground, and if they do, just go pick up another one. If we'd known that, I think the design for our pass-through would have been a lot different. And we also might not have made it a pass-through elevator. We maybe would have ended up with, a side elevator. I think there were some robots like that. So I think it was kind of a misidentification of a couple of goals. And if we'd ended up with kind of a lighter mechanism that was less prone to failure, especially in the early stages, it would have come out a lot stronger. But I definitely still stand by the fact that having a cycle where you are flipping through your pass through as you're driving backwards to pick up a hatch, and you flip it back over and you're lifting up the elevator right as you reach the scoring area is probably like the most satisfying thing in the world. And when your vision works too, that's just like, I love it. But yeah, pass through, I think we missed the mark on a couple of things, but as a driver, from a driver's perspective, I think it was pretty good.
Do you have anything to add?
I'm not on
Cool.
the mechanical sub-team either, so I have very little knowledge of that part.
Okay, so let's move on to the next question. Looking back at the LA North Regional, in which order were your second picks listed, and what qualities about them made them stand out? Like, which specific teams?
I can try and take this one. Obviously LA North was a while ago. So I don't know off the top of my head what order we had our teams in. I do know we were specifically looking at defense, especially. We were noting down a lot about which paths they took and how they could help with defense. I know their driving ability we were thinking about because some teams were getting stuck on the bars in the middle of the field a lot. So we try and keep that in mind, as well as can they still score, worst comes to worst. If they could go on our buddy climb, that was obviously a big part of it. More than that, I can't tell you off the top of my head which teams we had in our second pick. Usually it's a few people from our first pick, like the high teams we have in our first pick would be in our second pick as well, because they're pretty versatile, higher performing robots, while we have a lot of really strong second picks as well, who are just good at defense, driving ability, high reliability with not going in cap or anything during a match. Livy, if you have anything to add, if you can remember back then.
I can't remember specifically, but I definitely think between year to year or just in general, the better your driving ability is, that will always put you higher up in a pick list. Having good control over your robot, having good reliability, and being able to maneuver is incredibly useful no matter what the game is. It's pretty much a given that if you're better at driving, your robot will perform better, whether you're doing defense or scoring or climbing or anything like that.
Great. Okay, so this is our last question because we're going to be wrapping up pretty soon. But what is the most important thing to keep in mind when it comes to field strategy?
I guess Kate and I can both answer, but I can go first. I think I would say that the most important thing is maximizing what your robot can do. So especially in qualifications, don't try to get too caught up in, making a 3 robot plan with timestamps and everything. Just say, here's what our robot can do. and how can we make sure that we're doing as much as possible and contributing as much as we can to a win or to some ranking points. So part of that is having a strong robot design that you've thought through a lot. Part of that is in your pit and in your test, making sure your robot is robust, it's consistent, it's not breaking in between every single match, it doesn't, run into a wall and fall apart, that type of thing.
Yeah, adding on to that, same thing as Livy, just trying to doing the best you can in your matches. If you are a robot that maybe can't score in the high goal or something, just try and find something that you're really good at. If you can't score really well, then become really good at defense or maybe counter defense even. It's just trying to focus on one thing that can set you apart from everybody else that you're doing really well.
So if nobody else has anything to add on, it's time for us to wrap up now. Again, if you have any other questions, please contact us at the email listed on the slide, strategy@citruscircuits.org. And I hope you enjoyed our presentation and that you'll enjoy the rest of the workshops. Thank you for attending and asking questions. Additionally, I believe there's going to be a survey sent in the chat or already existing in the chat where you can give feedback on our presentation. So again, thank you so much for watching the Field Strategy Workshop, and have a great rest of your day.